10-4, John 12.
The office.
10-4, hey, can you 911 outside?
911, what's your emergency?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 13 of my series, Crafts and Crimes. My name is Kelly of Miss Kelly's Gifts. Every week, I post a new video of myself crafting while talking about a different true crime case. This week, I will be talking about the crimes of Roger Reese Kibbe, otherwise known as the I-5 Strangler. I couldn't find very much information about his childhood or early life, but this is what I found. Roger Kibbe was born on May 21st, 1939 in San Diego, California. His parents were Jonathan and Lorraine Kibbe, and he had at least one brother. He was bullied at school for a stutter and was frequently beaten at home by his mother. Kibbe was arrested as a teenager for petty theft and prowling after he was found to be stealing women's bathing suits and stockings. It was alleged that he liked cutting up the garments he stole with a pair of scissors and that he tied himself up with the ladies' underwear that he stole. As an adult, Roger Kibbe settled in Northern California, east of San Francisco, where he married a woman named Harriet, who was said to be domineering and very similar to his mother. He was a furniture maker by trade and actually enjoyed skydiving in his spare time. After Roger Kibbe's crimes came to light, a newspaper in Stockton, California, reported that his brother was a homicide detective. It was said that he may have asked his brother about police procedures and how investigators collect forensic evidence before he began committing his crimes. In September 1977, Roger Kibbe placed a bogus job posting to a trade school in San Francisco looking for a secretary. It was his intention to lure his first victim with this posting. Unfortunately, 21-year-old Lou Ellen Burley took the bait and met with Kibbe on September 10th for an alleged interview. He told her that his office was currently under construction, and they met in his van. There, he tied Lou Ellen up before driving her to Lake Berryessa in Napa, where he proceeded to sexually assault the young woman before strangling her to death. Roger Kibbe then dumped Burley's body in a nearby riverbed, where her remains would go undiscovered for 30 years. Police considered Roger Kibbe a suspect in the disappearance of Lou Ellen Burley, but there was not enough evidence to make a connection, and the case quickly went cold. It would be nearly 10 years before Roger Kibbe took his next victim. 21-year-old Laura Hedick, who would occasionally work as a sex worker, was last seen getting into the van of a man in his 50s on April 20th, 1986. She was never seen alive again after this. Laura's badly decomposed body was found on the side of the I-5 interstate southeast of Sacramento in September 1986. The tank top that she had been wearing had odd-sized holes cut into it before it was used to strangle her, and her hair was cut off. All of this was part of his MO that helped investigators connect his crimes. Unfortunately, Laura Hedick would not be the last young woman to go missing and be found on the side of the I-5. Kibbe's thirst for sexual violence and bloodshed would only increase, and he struck twice in July. On July 3rd, 1986, he abducted 29-year-old Barbara Ann Scott. She was sexually assaulted and strangled to death, with the same oddly shaped cuts found to her clothes. Barbara's body was found later that same day under a tree on a golf course in Antioch. Roger Kibbe's second victim in July was 19-year-old Stephanie Brown. She was attacked on the 15th. Her car was found abandoned along I-5 before police found her body in a nearby drainage ditch in San Joaquin County. Like the other victims, she was sexually assaulted and strangled to death, with unusual patterns cut into her clothes, and her hair was all cut off. Police located a pair of scissors near Stephanie's body. 1 month later, on the 17th of August, 26-year-old Charmaine Sabra was driving along I-5 with her mother when their car broke down. An allegedly good Samaritan pulled over and offered to take one of them for help because he only had room in his car for one person. Charmaine went with the man, and 3 months later, on November 9th, 1986, her body was discovered by a hunter near Ione, California. Her body showed signs of sexual abuse and strangulation, and both her clothing and portions of her hair had been cut away. Fearing they had a serial killer on their hands, police began keeping a close eye on Interstate I-5. They would deploy female officers disguised as stranded motorists. The suspect was described by witnesses as a middle-aged white man with a large nose who drove a van. Roger Kibbe was pulled over for a traffic violation not long after these operations began. The officer noticed that he matched the composite sketch circulating at the time, thanks to a description provided by Laura Heedick's boyfriend. Kibbe admitted to soliciting prostitutes, which meant that he was frequently in the areas where the victims might have last been seen, and that he had a vehicle similar to the one they were last seen getting into. Because his brother was a homicide detective, Roger had picked his brains about how to handle being investigated. Unfortunately, Roger Kibbe was released without any charges being brought against him and went on to kill his final victim of 1986. On December 21st, 1986, the remains of 25-year-old Catherine Kelly Quiñones were discovered near the Pope Creek Bridge at Lake Berryessa. She had been sexually assaulted, strangled to death, and her clothes and hair cut with scissors. Police were able to identify Quiñones when her fingerprints were identified as belonging to Tracy Lynn Goebel, one of her 17 aliases. Karen Louise Finch, age 25, disappeared on June 14, 1987. Her body was discovered in a slough house ditch in Sacramento County 7 days later. She was sexually assaulted. Her hair and clothes were cut, but she wasn't strangled. Instead, her throat had been slashed. Investigators also found duct tape in what remained of her hair. Unfortunately, Roger Kibbe was never charged for the murder of Karen Finch. Despite all the similarities between her murder and the murders of his other confirmed victims, no conclusive link could be made. The downfall of this monster came in September 1987 when Kibbe was arrested for attempting to abduct Deborah Guff, a sex worker in downtown Sacramento. While he was in custody, police discovered evidence in his van that linked him to the I-5 Strangler killings. This included a murder kit that contained a white nylon cord tied around 2 6-inch dowels, handcuffs, a vibrator, a 6-inch pair of scissors, and hair elastics. The nylon cord was determined to be the same type used for parachutes, and as we know, Roger Kibbe was an avid skydiver. Believing they had found their killer, the police wanted to keep him off the streets, but unfortunately, the evidence was too circumstantial, and he made bail until his trial. Roger Kibbe was charged with battery and solicitation. He received an 8-month sentence for his crimes against Deborah, and this gave investigators time to build their case. While he was in jail, the body of 17-year-old Darcy Renee Frackenpole, a runaway from Seattle who worked as a sex worker, was discovered in South Lake Tahoe. Her body was discovered by a jogger not far from where Kibbe's detective brother lived. Darcy, like the other victims, was sexually assaulted before being strangled to death and having unusual patterns cut into her clothes and her hair cut off. Using the forensic technology available at the time, investigators set out to link Roger Kibbe to the murder of Darcy Frackenpole. A fungal spore found on the cord used to strangle Darcy, fibers on her stockings which had been used to gag her, red paint, and tiny black particles all connected her back to his car. It was at this point that Kibbe's homicide detective brother encouraged him to confess to her murder. and Roger Kibbe was brought to trial for the murder on February 14th, 1981. The forensic evidence, along with the testimony of both Deborah Guff and friends of Darcy Frackenpole, who saw her getting into Kibbe's car, led to his conviction on March 18th, 1991. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison that May and taken to Pleasant Valley State Prison in Coalinga, California. While being taken to his cell, Roger Kibbe was overheard to have said that he had killed a few women before asking, "What's the big deal?" Roger Kibbe allegedly, in the time after his trial, confessed to his wife Harriet that he had killed at least 4 other women. She was shocked by his confession and asked him why he did these horrible things, and he simply replied, "I don't know." He also went on to share that his method of picking up victims involved driving up and down the interstate until he found a likely candidate, and then driving ahead of her, pretending to be disabled and preying upon her if she stopped to help. He would also target sex workers, posing as a customer and luring women into his car. Now, if you're like me, I can hear you asking, well, what about Kibbe's other victims? Well, don't worry, because the story doesn't end here. But it would take another 17 years for the forensic technology to advance enough for him to finally be charged for their murders. In March 2008, advancements in forensic technology finally linked Roger Kibbe to 6 of the other victims. On September 29th, 2009, over 30 years after his murder spree first began, he pled guilty to the sexual assault and murders of Lou Ellen Burley, Laura Hedick, Barbara Ann Scott, Stephanie Brown, Charmaine Sabra, and Catherine Kelly Quiones. Roger Kibbe pled guilty to the crimes to avoid the death penalty, and 1 month later he was sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms. As part of his plea deal, he agreed to lead investigators to the location of Lou Ellen Burley's body. For 2 years, they searched the Lake Berryessa area, but the terrain had changed so much in those 3 decades that Kibbe wasn't very much help. Finally, in June of 2011, Napa County Deputy Sheriff Michael Bartlett was hiking and searching near Lake Berryessa, where he eventually pulled a bone out of a creek. The bone was forensically matched to Lou Ellen Burley, the only one of Roger Kibbe's victims who wasn't found at the time of their murder. Roger Kibbe, who was serving out his sentence at Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California, was found unresponsive in his cell in March 2021. In a fitting twist of fate, 40-year-old Jason Boudreau, a self-proclaimed Satanist, strangled Roger Kibbe to death the very same day that they became cellmates. When asked why he committed the crime, Boudreau said that it was to avenge Kibbe's victims. He used the dark arts to free their souls from the grasp of their killer. He also went on to refer to the murder of Kibbe as a, quote, human sacrificial offering to the God Most High. Prosecutors have stated they would not be seeking the death penalty for Jason Boudreau, so the worst he is looking at is an additional life sentence on top of the life sentence he was already serving. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Crafts and Crimes. If you want to know about the things I'm crafting, please feel free to check out the links in the description. If you found this video interesting, please leave a like and a comment below with the future cases you want me to talk about. Don't forget to subscribe with notifications on so you don't miss out on any future uploads. I'll see you all next time.